Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time, Talk of the Stacks is a free lecture series produced by Friends with guest authors who focus on the craft of writing across a broad array of genres and topics. Now, whether you are here with us in person at Minneapolis Central Library or tuning in from home, we're thrilled that you could join us for another engaging talk. Now, tonight, our 2023 season continues with Patrick Reusse, the legendary Star Tribune columnist and author of the new book, Tales from the Minnesota Sports Beat. But first, on behalf of the library and Friends, we would like to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. By offering this land acknowledgement, we commit to recognizing Indigenous nations and to holding ourselves accountable to the work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I would next like to recognize our generous sponsors who help make this series possible. A huge thank you to the Star Tribune, U.S. Bank, LSC Architects, and Knorr Company. So let's give them a hand. Now, for every talk, we like to share an update about the library and what is new. And tonight, I have something that will be pleasing to the palate, especially for us sports fans out here: pizza. Our friends at Black Sheep Pizza are donating 20% of their profits through the end of March to the library. Now, with North Loop and Eastlake locations in Minneapolis, and carry out and delivery, you can grab a slice and you can support your library. It's a win-win. So for those of you here tonight and you find your stomach rumbling, they are open till 10 o'clock over on that Washington Avenue location. And now, finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our special guests. Tonight's moderator, Steve Yeager, is the Star Tribune's Chief Marketing Officer and Senior Vice President of Circulation. Our next guest, Chip Scoggins, is a Star Tribune sports columnist and a legendary and a co-author of this evening's featured book. And finally, our guest of honor, Patrick Reusse, is a Star Tribune senior columnist and a legendary fixture in the Minnesota sports scene. Starting as a sports writer in 1965 and continuing through to today, Reusse has covered every sports event imaginable during his career in newspapers, radio, podcasts, and television. His unique writing style and eye for human interest angles has made him a master storyteller, which is well represented by the stories now collected in Tales from the Minnesota Sports Beat. Please join me in welcoming moderator Steve Yeager and guest authors Chip Scoggins and Patrick Reusse to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you. Thanks, Christy. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thank you to our very sizable audience that's streaming at home. We're glad you're here, whether you're in person or you're online. As is always the case with Talk of the Stacks, we're here because of a book. This is that book. I'm conflicted about whether to tell you to go out and buy a copy and support the authors, or whether to visit your local library and check it out. So just read it, follow your conscience, and read it however you think it's best. We have a couple of prolific storytellers with us tonight, so settle in for a special 4-hour Talk of the Stacks. We'll get you out of here before the pizza place closes, probably. Chip, I'm going to keep everybody in suspense and wait to hear from Patrick.
Yes.
We'll start with you. You're in your 23rd year at the Star Tribune, and you've worked alongside Pat the whole time. And so you had a chance to see how he works and how he does what he does. In the preface to the book, Dan Barrero, who most of our audience probably knows, says that one of the Reusse rules is write like you're covering a beat. What is Patrick's beat?
His beat is Minnesota. His beat is finding stories that no one else is going to find and tell them really well. If there's a great story in southern Minnesota, he's going to get in his car and drive down there and get it. If there's a great story right here in the Twin City, he's going to get it. And it doesn't have to be the pros. It doesn't have to be college. I think where Pat really excels is finding those stories that no one else would go get, and no one else is going to tell it as good as he is.
I think he's getting better at it, if that's possible. I do. As a reader, my wife and I have a little bit where when his columns in the paper, one of us will say, what's he after today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's really after some stories that would not be told otherwise.
Well, no, and sometimes he'll tell me he's going somewhere to pick up this story, and I'm just like, I wish I could do that. That's a great, and it's going to be great because he's going to talk to mom, dad, cousin, uncle, the town mayor, the town sheriff. He's going to talk to everybody because everybody knows Pat, and they want to tell him their story. And that's the thing, I think, Pat, we have this kind of creed in journalism that everybody has a story, and you try to remember that. Pat personifies that and goes out and realizes that everybody does have a story. You just have to go find it and tell it.
There's a sentence that appears in the book a lot. You've heard me say this. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right? If you read the book, you saw that how many times. As you got underway, was there a story that Pat told you that made you think, no, this is unbelievable?
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite story in the book. It's the day that Patrick was going to play hooky from school or from work. I think he was 17 years old. He was going to go to, I don't want to give too much away, but he was going to go to a keg party at a farm out in Prior Lake.
Those were hard to miss.
Yeah, he didn't want to miss the keg party. I don't think he called in sick. He just didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And they're out in the middle of this field. The farmer drives up. Kids are scattering everywhere. And the farmer gets out and says, is there a Patrick Reusse here? And Patrick kind of sheepishly raises his hand. And he said, Sid Hartman said, get your butt to work. Now, how he found him?
Nobody knows.
It's a mystery.
My father didn't know where I was.
Pat, I'm gonna reintroduce you because I think you're worth it. And I'm going to reintroduce you by quoting something you wrote last October 15th. You said, things couldn't be more grand as a part-time sports columnist at the Star Tribune. We have plenty of firepower to take care of the important stuff, and the bosses mostly allow me my whims. You don't strike me as part-time. You started in 1963 as what was called a copy boy at the Morning Tribune.
August 63, yes.
You're now 35 years in your second stint at the Star Tribune. You came back in 1988. You've been on the radio since you started on the radio in 1980. You spent 20 years on the sports show, Sunday nights with Mike Max and Sid and Dark Star. Inducted in the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame in 2019. Here, I think this is the best accolade, though. And I'm going to introduce you with the quote from Bud Grant that's on the book. There are reporters and there are writers. Pat is a writer, and an excellent one. Now, I like that quote, but backstage, before we got started, you told me there's a little more to that quote than meets the eye.
Yes, Sid, of course, and Bud were tremendous friends from back when Sid let him use his car when he was covering the Gophers, and Bud was playing for the Gophers, and there's never been a favor that Bud turned down. So, but he used to get a little feisty once in a while with us when we expressed an opinion, and he'd say, Bud would say, Sid is a reporter. The rest of you guys are just writers. And then Sid died, and now he says to me, you're a writer. I like that. The rest of these guys are just reporters. So even soon to be 96, Bud has got the versatile mind. That's for sure.
So here comes this relative rookie who approaches you about doing a book about you and with you. What was your reaction?
That I didn't want to do much of the work if we did it. So I had enough problems, and Chip was going to do the guts of the thing, and I said okay. And I'm glad it turned out to be a trade paperback because people don't have to overspend to get the thing, and it's a nice, easy read. You can do it in about a day and a half, and it turned out fine. But it was Chip was forceful of his opinion. And I'm glad he convinced me because it's kind of fun to have people, my grandkids are looking at it, what's this, why do they care about you? So it's fun in that case, and I'm glad we did it.
He was a little bit on the fence, so Patrick says, meet me at the Gopher Bar in St. Paul. We're going to get some coney dogs and talk about it, right? So I get there early, and I've traveled, many times with Pat over the years, and if you're at an airport or at a game or wherever in public, it's always, hey, Reusse, anytime he shows up. So I get to the Gopher Bar a little bit before Patrick, and there's a table with a group of men there, and then there's a couple over here, and Patrick walks in, and sure enough, hey, Reusse. So he walks over to the table, and within 30 seconds, they're dying laughing, and Pat came and sat down and said, and that's why we're going to do a book, right? And so he went ahead with it, and the thing that people don't know is Patrick does not like, no offense to the introduction, he doesn't like the legend stuff. He doesn't want to, his only insistence was, it has to be stories. My storytelling from my life, from my career, he didn't want it to be Patrick's the greatest thing in the world. He wanted it to be a collection of his stories that he's accumulated over his lifetime, and I think that resonates in the book.
I want to give you an update on the Gopher Bar, by the way. They took down all the hateful signs of political. That guy was to the right of Genghis Khan when he owned that place. But all those hateful signs have been removed. He died, and you could go in there without being threatened with assassination. So it's a dang fine coney dog too. It is. So.
Cash only too.
Yeah.
Pat, tell us about the writing process. Where did you meet? How did you do the work? Did you find that the stories came out easily, or did Chip have to pull them out?
We actually came into the Star Tribune maybe every other Sunday there for a few hours, and I would babble, and Chip would record it, and he would choose what he wanted to put in the book. And I told you this, Steve, last time. I told you this last time we were together. I wrote Sid's book in 1997, and 2 days later, Sid called me up and says, I want to write another book. It was published, and I said, well, Sid, we got a contract. We can't exactly get out another book. But there's a little bit of that feeling with me, too, because I didn't take extensive notes. I just babbled about various sports and stuff, and it's a narrative, and there's other stories. It's funny, Paulie Hagen from the Philadelphia baseball writer, he's in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and he called me yesterday and said he's writing a book about what it used to be like to really cover baseball. And we got to the drinking section, so I thought I'd call you, I got sober in 81. We can probably point that. But during the 70s, during my years, and we went light on those. We only had a couple of good drinking stories in the book, so we went light on those. Because my current wife, I actually met her. She was a counselor at St. Mary's. Now, we didn't do it. I didn't meet her again until 2 years after I got out, but she was the one who did my evaluation and said, yeah, you can stay. But so she doesn't like the rehashing the drinking stories too much, so we went light on those, but I gave Paulie a couple of the better ones yesterday. So
When it was all done, was there one that came to you after the fact? We should have put that in the book.
I'm sure there's dozens of them. I can't think one right offhand. But I think we got most of them in there. I mean, I covered 24 straight World Series and 18 Masters and all the local stuff and all of those. There's some of them, and we only did one chapter on my father, who was pretty much insane, and there's a lot. There's probably a book on him if you wanted. Full the Minnesota Undertaker, and I've always said, if you're an undertaker in a small town, 40 is a good year. That's what we were. Our goal every year was 40. If we could get 40 funerals, we were, and the more Catholics that died, the better, because the old man was a Catholic undertaker, and Slayton had the Lutheran undertaker. So back then there was a differentiate, but. One day to embalm him, pick him up and embalm him, one day to wake him, one day to bury him. 3 times 40, 120. That gave him 240 days to think of stuff, and some of it is really weird. Only some of the best Richard stories are in there, but there was probably another book in my old man Richard too, who was quite the goofball, to say the least.
I thought the same thing. I wanted more than the one chapter. You both like to write about characters. And as Chip pointed out, in recent years, you seem to write more about amateur sports, small colleges, town ball, and so forth. Is that because that's where the characters are today? Or does big-time sports have fewer characters than it used to?
Well, we actually, since we added Lavelle, we now have Chip, Jim Suin, and Lavelle, and I'm kind of the guy who doesn't travel and do stuff. And I actually say this, I discovered during the pandemic that there's 10,000 stories out there that you never did because you went to a ball game, and you went to and now with, with deadlines what they are, with access what it was, it's just a lot more fun to go out and talk to some characters. Today I went and saw 89-year-old Johnny Mayasich, who's the greatest hockey player in Minnesota history probably. But he started telling me about his upbringing in Eveleth and places like this. It's going to be, it won't get as many reads as Eric Kendricks getting cut by the Vikings, but it's going to be more fun to write. It was, it's going to be more fun to write, and that's kind of what I've discovered is they're out there, and you gotta go meet the people and get them to tell you some yarns. And Chip's doing a great job of doing those. The thing he did going up to Red Lake was fantastic, and a lot of other stories. He also beat me to the kid up at Cherry, Minnesota, the guard from Cherry, Minnesota. So that's those kind of stories are great. And I hope. I almost get the idea that print is for the good yarn, and we can, if you want to read about the 3 stories on the Vikings, you can find 2 of them online. That's my theory.
But the thing too is, and Steve, Pat would tell you this, the business has changed. Like
Yes.
he loves, the old coaches that, you're never going to get close to anymore like that. The athletes you never get. Clem Haskins, Patrick has an incredible relationship with Clem. You're not going to get that with a Gopher coach in today's media world. It just doesn't happen. And the way the media landscape has changed, the way access has changed, the way everything is more controlled, it's far easier to go out and find, if everybody's going this way, veer this way, you're going to find a story, just because, particularly in the professional ranks, access is so restrictive now that you're just not going to get to know the coaches and athletes.
And when I talked to Clem the other day, he said, I gotta sit down with you next time I'm in town, or you come down here and I want to talk to you. And so Clem's going to admit that he never cheated. So I can tell you that. He is my favorite all-time coach. Him and Bernsey probably are my 2 favorites.
Musselman?
Musselman was completely insane, but I really loved following him around the country. I went to Tampa to talk to him, San Diego to talk to him. I went to 4 or 5 different places where he was, and he was always up to something. I could guarantee you that we wouldn't be losing some recruit from California because we don't have any name, image, and likeness. Harvey McKay and Bill were doing name, image, and likeness 50 years before anybody else was. So, they were, I'm going to tell you this story. What the heck? John Rowe tells this story. The great John Rowe has great stories about covering the Big Ten when there was 10 coaches, 10 teams, and you knew them all, and everybody knew the beat writers. And Johnny Orr was coaching Michigan, and he was trying to get Campy Russell, who was a great player. And Harvey and Bill went on a recruiting trip. This was when boosters could recruit. Harvey's one reason boosters could no longer recruit. But supposedly they took Campy down to a hotel and put $25,000 cash on a bed and say, here, run your fingers through this. This is what you get. And Johnny Orr sees Roe that winter, and he's screaming at him. He's saying, your guys are coming in here, and he offered cash. And John said, Johnny, where do you end up going to school? He was at Michigan. And Orr says, that's beside the point. It cost me more than it should have. It's basically, so, that kind of stuff that's fun to have that in your background, know that kind of those crazy guys. But Clem, I do, George Norman won a Pulitzer Prize for that award and the whole thing, but as scandals go, 50 years, 30 years
30
later,
years, yeah.
Clem scandal is, nothing.
Well, you're writing about the Clem Haskins years. We talked about last time. I subscribed to the Star Tribune and had it delivered to my dorm room, if you can
Yes.
imagine, so I could read your coverage of the Gophers. And that chapter in the book is really delightful because you really show in very practical terms what that kind of access meant.
Oh, yeah. I wrote that.
And the ribbing you and Richard Coffey would get into
Yes.
with each other. Just talk about covering a team that gave you that kind of access.
Those Gopher teams of 89 and 90, we got to know all the guys. But Clem, this was in the first 2 years when they were terrible. I went on a road trip with them to Indiana and Columbus. This was when the Big Ten played Thursdays for Saturdays, and they all had travel partners, and they were going from Bloomington, Indiana to Columbus. And Clem let me get on the bus to go with him to Columbus. And I sat across the aisle from him, and he talked for 3 hours about his best buddy, Dwight Smith, and his lovely daughter and lovely sister drowning when he was at Western Kentucky, and started crying. And I mean, that ain't happening. You're not getting that kind of access for sure, that's for sure. And of course, the Coffee story when he kicked me in the head with both tennis shoes and made it on the bloopers it was on the bloopers for 20 years. At the Superdome, he flipped over the press row and got me with my computer flew up, and the only thing I could think of is I don't care about my head. I hope my computer's not broken. And it went down, and so I go in there after the game, and I said, Richard. And he says, yeah. He says, Rick Bay, the AD, came in and said he'd give me $50 if I did it again. So, that kind of, you don't get that from players today, that's for sure.
You have a story you're working on now, Chip, just to maybe give a little preview of that. This is about access.
Yeah.
In the upcoming boys' high school hockey tournament. Tell people what they'll see
Yeah.
in the coming days.
Yeah, well, there's so much mystique about the hockey tournament, so I always wanted to embed with the team to kind of show what these kids get to experience leading up to the tournament. So Maple Grove was gracious enough. They won the section championship Thursday night. So basically the clock started from Thursday night, and we'll go through the state tournament, and just has spent the week with that team and their players and in their houses, in the locker room, in all these different things that they're doing this week. Just kind of show, here's what these kids are, this tournament is, and I've heard it so many times from guys who've gone on to play in the NHL that was the highlight of their career, being able to play in the state tournament. And so just to be able to show that and what, all the different things that they're doing. And so me and a photographer have done that, and we'll be out there with them tomorrow and before the game, riding the bus with them. So it's been really cool. And that's you'll get those at high schools because I think they're still a little more, they're not as jaded probably as, not probably, definitely, as you're going to find at the college level, at the pro level. So it's a lot easier to kind of get that. But the access that they've granted us has been pretty remarkable.
Although if you're a hockey parent, you better be able to drink. Man,
That's right.
I got grandkids that are finally playing hockey, and I went on a road trip with them at War Road last year, and I was the only sober adult in the whole place. What is wrong with these people? They're crazy. They're goofy, but...
Is it harder to be a reporter or a fan?
I don't know. I got to say, though, you got Carlos Gonzalez is shooting the pictures for you, the photos. As it's the best reason to actually subscribe to the print edition of the Star Tribune is we still are committed to still photography. And we still have a lot of papers all over the country they have one photographer. we still have the greatest, I think the greatest photography staff in the world. Aaron Levinsky, Jerry Holt, all these guys. Carlos is fantastic. Jerry Holt, I was going to 2014, the All-Star game was here, and we were kind of doing a piece on the other previous All-Star games that were in Minnesota. And 1965, the greatest baseball team ever assembled, played here in the National League. And Willie Mays was the star of that, and I wanted to get Willie Mays. And really hard to get, really tough to get. And I finally got through his lady, and all my buddies from San Francisco says, you'll be lucky if you get him for 15 minutes. So, not to be ethnic about it, but I said, I want a photographer on this, and I want it to be Jerry Holt. Jerry Holt's a brother from Mississippi, and Willie Mays is a brother from Alabama. And Jerry's a great photographer. And by the time I got up to the suite at the Giants ballpark, Jerry had Willie so wound up and tied and had him so BS'd that we got 90 minutes with Willie Mays. And you finally had to say, hey, thanks. Jerry was, I mean, the great thing about photographers is not only the shooting they do, the photos they do, but the relationship they build with the people. I did one on the nun from St. Benedict, a 91-year-old nun who's the biggest football fan, and I mean sports fan at St. Benedict. And Carlos went up and shot it, and he was everybody's best friend within 10 minutes, so it was great.
Yeah, we had that at Red Lake. Aaron Levinsky did that project with me, and the most emotional part of that story was the coach. He lost his son years ago. He was 10 years old, and they buried him. They had consulted with the spiritual leaders on the reservation. They buried their son in their backyard, and there was earlier in one of the first trips we were supposed to go, and he was going to take us to the backyard, and it fell through, and it was our last trip up there. And I'm kind of like, should I ask again? Is it, it's a little, I mean, obviously it's a very private thing and sensitive thing for them, and Aaron just, we were standing there talking. Aaron's like, can we go to your backyard? Can we come see your house? And he was like, yeah, great, come on. He took us. So it's like, our photographers make us better.
Yeah.
Make our reporting better a lot of times. And Pat's right, I would put our photographer staff up against anybody. I
was doing a piece on the Stearns County League, the old hayseed league up there in 10 little towns, and it was going to be a Sunday thing, and Levinsky was going to shoot it, and I said, hey, run up there, there's a game like on Sunday, run up and take a couple of pictures, take a couple of photos. He went up there 3 times. He took a drone twice. I mean, he had this ungodly, wonderful photo at dusk as the game was being played, and they just played it in the middle of the paper. And he's crazy. He's so good. I'm just saying that. I just feel that way about our photographers. It's an advantage that anybody who subscribes to the Star Tribune doesn't realize, I think, that nobody else is doing this. So.
If, as Chief Marketing Officer, I thank you for that message. And if anyone doesn't know the story that Chip's referring to, in December, he wrote a story about Red Lake Nation's football team. Very moving story. So search Red Lake Nation Football Star Tribune, and you'll find that story from December. Really one of the best pieces of sports journalism that I've seen in the last several years. Just terrific.
Thank you.
Only at 210 inches or something.
That's right. I showed restraint.
The book opens a window, for people who don't normally see how reporters work. Kind of opens a window into how you work, and I think more colorfully how you used to work. And as I've said before, the phone is almost a character in the book.
Oh, yes.
At points, and it's just remarkable how reliant you were on the phone, but also how creative you could be with the phone. My favorite story about how essential and how helpful the phone was to a reporter in a pre-internet age involves Kent Herbeck's parents.
Yes.
Tell that
was,
story.
That could have turned out worse. Big Herbie, I was writing for the afternoon St. Paul Dispatch then, and I had a column done, but Ken Herbeck hits a home run his first game in Yankee Stadium and won a game. So I had to get a phone number for said, is that me? Somebody's ringing. I had to get a phone number, and you know how you did it then? Yeah, well, call the operator, and she gave it to you because it was a home. So Ed and Tina Herbeck, I called home, and then Tina answered, and she's all happy, and I got a bunch of quotes, and I said, hey, can I talk to your husband? Can I talk to Ed? And Ed sounded like he had 5 or 6 cocktails celebrating, which his son might have, but he didn't. But I had it, I wrote it, and I had a line like that in, and I was just getting ready to send it in for the next day's paper, and I said, maybe I should, maybe just, and then it turned out he had ALS, and it would have been, it was saved by the bell on that one, and then, but Ed lasted long enough with it to push himself. When Herbie hit a grand slam that next spring in the ballpark, and Ed was in front of the press box there, and I still can see him pushing himself up to join in the standing ovation. It was something, but sometimes you get saved and sometimes you don't. I think, did I tell the Red Sox?
I thought you were going to talk about tippy-toe ball throwing.
Oh, the what?
Tippy-toe ball throwing.
Somebody just screwed that up, by the way. They congratulated me on the 30th anniversary, and it was actually the 32nd. Yeah. I said, maybe you eliminated the 2 COVID years. I don't know.
That's right.
But, March, not that I remember it, but it was March 2, 1991. But, anyway, we'll let that pass. I will say in that same column, because the spirit in which it was written, I compared Clem with Tariq Aziz, who was Saddam Hussein's guy who didn't always tell us the truth during the. And Clem was making all kinds of excuses.
Could you imagine the clicks that column would get today?
Yeah, it wouldn't work, but anyway, whenever anybody mentions that, I get thrown off my game, so I can't remember where I was going there. So.
I think you mentioned it. I think you threw yourself off.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's shift gears a bit. You were 9 years in the business when Title IX passed.
Yes.
I don't remember where you were working at that time.
I was St. Paul.
St. Paul.
I was actually the most ill-equipped morning sports editor in the history of American journalism.
Well, you're still in the business last year for the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And I'm curious, a question and a follow-up question. First of all, what was your reaction? What were the reactions of your colleagues when that happened in 1972?
We had no idea where we were headed. I mean, we were so ingrained into the fact that, I asked myself today, how did we get away with it? How did manhood get away with this forever? That girls were supposed to be cheerleaders. And it is astounding to me, but we didn't know what we were going to do, and then they started playing, and then we were so stupid and naive that we applied a standard of, why aren't they better? Well, they didn't play for, their entire lives, might have something to do with it. We were not. I had a great conversation with Voles, because the only person Chris Voles disliked worse than me was Sid Hartman. So, because Sid Hartman was still anti, women's athletics 20 years after, we had our go-arounds and goes-arounds, so I was going to do a column on her for the 50th anniversary, and I texted her up. I texted her and said, Chris, your old pal Reusse, I need you. And she texted me back and said, I only talk to reformed sexists. Are you one? And I said, yes, I got a granddaughter who's playing hockey. So 53 minutes, 52 of which she's the greatest talker of all time. She is unbelievable. I talked to her again the other day about something else I'm doing, and she's unbelievable. I can see how she tied everybody in knots when she was over there fighting for women's rights at the University of Minnesota.
So in 2023, as you both look across the sports landscape in Minnesota,
Yes.
and you look at women's sports in particular, what excites you?
Well, I go watch. I started watching my granddaughter play junior, 12-year-old hockey, 11-year-old hockey, that kind of hockey. And then I went to a Minnetonka-Andover regular season game, and what makes it very applicable to the 1970s is you remember what girls and women's hockey was like when they first started playing in the mid-90s. And you see it now, and it's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
It's good, it's fun, it's exciting, and you say, oh, okay, maybe that's why women's basketball wasn't too great in the mid-'70s, or even the early '90s, according to me. But anyway, it's been very instructive to watch girls hockey, and girls hockey, women's sports are important enough that we can fire Lindsay Whalen because she's not doing the job.
Well, let's talk about current events a bit, and specifically Gopher basketball. I was thinking as we were getting ready tonight, for a short time we've had two local basketball stars coaching both the men's and women's teams. I'm not aware of that happening anywhere else. Kind of a unique situation. One coach just left, one is struggling. Why can't the university seem to find success across all the major sports at the same time?
Well, we used to love the barn when there were 12,000 or 14,000 people in there. When you get 5,000 in that place, or in the case of the women's team, 1,500, it is a dump. And then you have the men's basketball team, and I'm sure this is applicable to the women too. Name, image, and likeness have none. They have none at this point. And supposedly this kid from California is going to get a couple 100,000 from Louisville. So you can't use name, image, and likeness in recruiting, they tell us, unless it accidentally slips out that we have this $250,000 from this company they don't know where to spend it. So it's to me, it's the thing about with the transfer portal and being able to basically pay players. It's much easier to get worse when you're bad to get worse than it is to get better, because people are going to take off and they're not winning, and it's bad. It's a bad situation over there. I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, and it's never been harder to be a coach than it is right now.
No, right.
And that's when you talk about the transfer portal, NIL, and everything that's going on, to put two coaches who have never been head coaches, Lindsay's never coached, into that environment, it's probably doomed to fail, right?
Yeah.
And then you had COVID on top of that. So it was kind of a perfect storm for her to struggle. I thought they should have given her one more year.
They should have given her at least until Monday.
Yeah,
Shouldn't have fired her on. They shouldn't have fired her on Thursday with the tournament here. Boy,
Yeah.
would I not had that move where that was.
Yeah, but there. I mean, it's with the way that players and athletes move around now in college sports.
Mm-hmm.
It's driving coaches who've been in it a long time. I don't think it's any coincidence that Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams and all these guys got out of the profession. Jay Wright at Villanova, I think they just said, not for me.
You know why my interest in college basketball is way down, though?
The three-point shot, right?
No, Krzyzewski left. I cared more about him losing than anything in American sports. It was every time I've never came closer to losing my sobriety as when he gets eliminated from the NCAA basketball. I couldn't stand that pompous ass. And they quit now.
Hope he's
and I
not
don't
live
care-
streaming this.
I don't care.
Yeah,
if
give the
Duke
people
wins.
what they want.
I don't care if Duke wins or loses now. It's kind of, it's I've lost that. It's kind of bad,
We have another Division I program in our city now.
How about them?
They are coming.
Yeah, you write about, you write, of course, about the St. John, St. Thomas rivalry quite a bit in the book. I was profoundly saddened by St. Thomas leaving the MIAC.
Yes.
I don't see how a conference gets better by kicking out its
Yes.
best team. But here it is a few years later, and they're not embarrassing themselves in Division I. What are your thoughts about their fortunes going forward?
Well, this guard they got from Brookfield, Wisconsin, is the best college guard in town, better than any of the Gopher guards. Andrew Rhodey, there's a transfer now. There's a rumor he might transfer.
They're worried about that.
Yeah, but Johnny Tower going from Division III to Division I. Chip knows him even better than me, but he's the real deal, and they'll be competitive. And I really think their goal, once they get their arena and get that 5 years that they can't be in a tournament, I really think their goal is to be staying where they are in football, because they can't afford a new football stadium and they can't afford all the scholarships, and be in the WCHA and women's hockey, and be in the CCHA and men's hockey, and be in the Big East and everything else. I think they really want to. I think the Big East would take this market too, because you got, they only got one college team in the state, Division I, and you got Creighton out here, you got Marquette out here, you got Butler out here. They'd like another team out here. I can see them being in the Big East in 5 years.
Yeah, there's no doubt that was their vision. I mean, I heard that multiple times over there. Think Marquette, think Creighton, think Butler. That's what they want to be. And Pat's right on Johnny Tower. I've known him for years, and he could have coached anywhere in college basketball, any level. He's that good a coach. It's just he found a home at St. Thomas. He was a professor. He loved being able to teach classes and coach, and so people probably didn't. And he wasn't a climber. He didn't care, about the Division I thing. But he's as good as you're going to find in terms of just X's and O's in coaching.
Will they find a fan base that's bigger than their alumni base here over time?
That's going to be a question.
Yeah, it's building. It's been better of late, but it's.
The fact that if you want to go to a game, you have to parachute in. It's a kind of the parking is a bit of a problem, to say the least. You don't. That's. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to. If they build this big ramp, then it's going to take like 3 days to get out of it.
Yeah.
It is a confined space.
Yes.
The town and country should have done the services for the rest of America and let them buy that land and put their stuff over there. Yeah. But I know some members there that don't like that opinion. So
we'll take some questions from the folks here, but one more for each of you. And I hate this question, Patrick. I really hate this question. When will you stop? Do you think about retiring?
Well, my contract's up at the end of this year.
He's not retiring.
I can tell you right now, the wife isn't saying, "Boy, when are you going to retire so you can be home more?" That's not happening. You can only watch so much Netflix together, and then you got to go downstairs and watch sports while she's watching Desperate Housewives from Omaha. And if you want to know about mackerel fishing in the Bering Sea, she can tell you about it. She's expert on all that stuff, reality stuff. So I don't know.
This is a no. I'm hearing
I don't know.
a
As
no.
long as my health's okay, I'm willing to keep going if they want me. So
the nature of a columnist, Chip, is that as opposed to a beat writer, is that you find the stories, right? You decide what stories to tell. Tell me if this is true. I seem to notice that the nature of the stories you write is changing a bit. I see more stories from high school in small towns. I see more stories from around the state, off the beaten path. Are you becoming Reusse?
Yeah, I'm trying.
a harder worker than one.
No. That's the thing when people say, "Is he going to retire?" You should see how hard he works.
I drove to Red Lake once and wanted to kill myself.
Yeah, it was,
8 times.
Yeah, it was probably about 5 years ago. And it wasn't anything like an epiphany, but I did a big story with Jake Sullivan, the former
Terrific story. Great story.
Tartan star. And really, I think we spent, Levinsky and I spent almost a year with him. And really got a kick out of that. And the story wound up being like 5 pages. And I'm like, yeah, that was kind of fun, really digging into a story. And then the Austin, Minnesota story came, and we spent a year with that, made 20 trips down there, Levinsky and I. And it's just kind of, now I'm seeking those stories out. Not to say I'm bored with the other part of the job, but after covering the Vikings for so long, or the Timberwolves, you sort of is like, I've sort of written that, and everybody's writing the same thing. So I go back to the original point of what Pat does, and what I'm trying to do is, I don't know that anyone else was going to tell the Red Lake story or tell the Austin story. So it's our job to go find those and tell them. I mean, this is if we're the Star Tribune and the paper of record in the state, it's our job to tell the great stories in this state, and we have to go find them.
Have you gotten over the 40-inch trim you took on that Austin story yet?
I sent my version to Pat. It's not the version that got in the paper.
I've been known to let out a curse word occasionally, but that conversation.
That was very insidery.
That conversation with Chip was not pleasant.
Yeah. It was painful.
Rob is out in the audience with a microphone, and he's ready to take your questions. So if you have a question for Chip or for Patrick, raise your hand, and Rob will get to you.
Can you tell us a good story about Dark Star?
Well, I'll tell you the one that's in the book. I think my favorite book, Dark Star story is ever. I actually was getting along well with Norm Green when he first came here in '91. He called me at home one morning, and they only had 4,000 people for a Montreal game, and he was crying. But come '91, the end of the year, they're in the Stanley Cup Finals, and Norm, it's revealed that the only way you can watch the Vikings is on paper. I mean, watch the North Stars in the Stanley Cup Finals was on pay-per-view, and only 30% of the city could you get it. So you either had to go to a bar. So I wrote the column. I believe it was for the Morning Tribune. Yeah, I wrote the column, and it was the first time he was ever referred to as Norm Greed. I blasted him. I blasted him for being cheap, and then they won that night to take a 2-1 lead in the Stanley Cup Finals. And remember, Norm had built, if you're old enough, you remember he'd built himself that little Nero-like platform up there in the corner where he could wave to the crowd and, kill them and all. I mean, well, Dark's goal in life was to get into that booth with Norm with one of his age-inappropriate girlfriends. So anyway, they win that game, and I'm driving home, and it's after midnight, and Dark's on 12-3. And the topic of the day is, does the Twin Cities really need a negative sports columnist like Patrick Reusse? And everybody that calls in, wants me to get killed in a car accident, and stuff like that. And they can't stand it. And Dark and I were like brothers, So I called him up, and during the break, I had his inside phone, and I said, Dark, that's a really interesting topic you got going there today, buddy. And he says, ain't it great? They bleep and hate you. I might do it again tomorrow, he said. That was the kind of, so that was Dark. You never could take anything Dark said seriously. And the other one is, I was having a party at my house, I think 60th birthday or something, and both Dark and Such, Joe Suchere, my longtime radio partner, were there. And Such says to Dark, I listen to you, what is the object of what is your thought when you start that show? What is your object? What is your thought? And he says, my thought when I start the show is, what can the next 3 hours do for me, Dark Star? And it was the most honest thing he ever said in his life. So those are two of my favorites among 50, at least.
Delightful evening, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. Patrick, I got a question about baseball managers.
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember the Earl Weavers and Gene Mauchs, and you must have a story or two sitting in a manager's office worth telling.
Well, Earl is my all-time favorite visiting character of any guy. He was absolutely hilarious, great manager. I was there for some of one of his greatest incidents was Butch Weiniger was catching for the Twins, and they got a moth in his ear. And it's an extra inning game. It's a steamy night in the middle of summer in Baltimore. And they got to call timeout, and they got to drown the moth so they can move it. This is where I love baseball. You get to see somebody drown a moth, but interrupt a game. But now Earl gets mad because the drowning is taking. And they had a great PR guy in the press box named Bob Brown, who was great, and he was giving us updates on the health of the moth during in the press box. And Earl finally goes nuts. He wants the game. Weiniger's got to leave the game. Earl out there screaming and hollering. He gets ejected. We're still trying to drown the moth. We go in after that game. But then the other time with Earl was Larry Heisel and Dan Ford were both tall, right-handed hitting black guys. And Larry Heisel's career batting average off the Orioles was about 500. And somebody leads off with a double, and Earl would intentionally walk a guy in the first inning if he was crazy. And Danny Ford steps in the box, and Earl looks up and thinks it's Larry Heisel and goes like this. And it gets to 3-0, and Palmer's in the dugout and says, "Earl, why are you walking Heisel to get to Ford?" And Earl comes running out of the press box, out of the dugout, waving at him. But he ends up walking him anyway, and Heisel hits a 2-run double. So Earl's in the press. I had to go see Earl after that. He usually went to the home team, but I went to the Earl's manager's office, and he started screaming, "Don't any of you SOBs ask me about this. I'm not going to." He had this great relationship with the Baltimore writers because they'd always argue strategy with him and get him. So Earl, it was great. And I can tell you one thing about Mock. I used to go out to dinner with him once in a while, and I was a much better drinker than Mock. I could drink 12, 14 gin and tonics, no problem. You give him 3 Manhattans, he was knee walking, man. But you could get some good information out of him when he was hammered, I'll tell you that. Anyway, I love Mock too. He was my favorite.
Favorite Twin to cover?
Tony Oliva, my favorite player in any sport, even though I knew him better as a coach, because he only played 2 years when I covered the team. But I knew him better as a coach. But he's the greatest human being of all time. He's just a great guy. Everybody loves Tony. I would say he is number one, yeah.
You talked in the book a little bit about John Gallardi. Can you share any others? I had the privilege of playing for him, so I'd love to hear a comment.
Yes. Were you ever there when a gnat bit him, so you had to stop practice? And he was the hypochondriac of all time. He was crazy. I'd go up there, and if I really needed a column someday in the spring or something, I'd go up and visit him. I'm up there one day, and they're putting in for wheelchair. They're putting in ramps, right? And John is saying, all those kids go to Southwest State. They don't go to St. I've never seen a kid in a wheelchair at St. He says, the stuff he can't use, he says, but the Coke guys love it. He said they can run it. I mean, he was just, oh, God, I loved him. He was so crazy, but the worst, as you know, the worst loser of all time. St. John's is scheduled Trinity, Texas, which is one of the top 5 teams in the country, and then Whitewater, which is the dynasty, and then the Bethel. That's how they opened the season. You couldn't have been able to get him out of the hospital if he had that schedule. The fear of 3 straight losses would have killed him. I loved the guy. He was the worst loser in the history of man. I got to tell you this. We're in Dayton. They went down to Dayton. They had a really good team. They're in the semifinals. I was flying to Viking game in Tampa, I think, and stopped in Dayton for the game. And he had a really good team in the semis in this big old mausoleum of a stadium that held like 60,000 for when Dayton played big-time football. And there was a great big storage room, kind of outside the ante room. And St. John's turned it over 10 times that day. 6 interceptions, 4 fumbles. And because John really thought this team could win it. And he's sitting out in this room by himself on a folding chair like this. And this big, empty, dank, lousy room, but the players are coming out, and he's saying, no, we're all replaceable. Everybody's replaceable. He's just babbling nonsensically. Everybody replaceable, and this great tackle, Steve O'Toole, comes walking out. He says, except him. Oh, God, I love that guy. Yeah. But if I coached against him, I'd hate him because he was, the referees were always robbing. He was another thing. Part of the Christmas Eve ceremony with him and his kids, and if the whole family get together, he'd show the tape of when St. John's got robbed by the officials, and he'd add to the splice more onto the film every year. This was a Christmas Eve treat after Mass.
So this is a different kind of question, but I think it's fair to say you've had a long career.
Yes.
What's it been like adapting to all the new technology? So you've done newspaper, you've written a book now, podcasts. Has it been easy, difficult adapting?
No, I'm behind the curve for sure, but I still, we got Slack.
Have you seen him on Twitter?
We got Slack and we got all that stuff now, but I still email in my columns, and then I email in the corrections about 45 minutes later, and then they say, is that it? And then, so I'm behind in that.
But you love Twitter.
In that curve. Oh, yeah, Twitter's the greatest. I'm
He
glad I
loves
didn't
the
have Twitter
adjective.
when I was drinking. No, I would have had a short career, I'll tell you. I have a governor now, believe it or not. So, anyway.
You're just going to have to cut in. Who's got the-
Pat, can I put you on the spot here for a second? So I just turned 62.
Okay.
So, the clock's ticking. The Wild, the Vikings, the Twins, the Timberwolves. Who is going to bring home a championship first?
I would say the Wild, probably. I hope it's not the Vikings. I hope the Vikings do not win the Super Bowl in my lifetime, because that, and I think that's something that's a badge of honor that they've all these great losses. I don't want them to ever win it. I don't want them to. Look at how it happened to the Cubs.
Yeah.
They finally won it. Now nobody gives a damn about them. So I think the Vikings. I think the Wild, though. Maybe this year. What's going on? They were giving up 8 goals a game, and now they give up 1. It's amazing right now. So I think Stanley Cup is the most random. They got no chance in basketball. They're never winning in basketball, and baseball is really hard. So I'd say hockey for sure. But they're going to win the NCAA men's hockey title this year for the first time since 2003. Motzkow's he's a really neat guy, and he is loaded, and hockey's random, but they're going to win it.
Here comes our last question, I think.
Yep, we do have time for one more question, but I do want to let you all know that the fun doesn't end here. Pat and Chip will be signing at the end of the bridge after the program, and books are for sale out in the lobby. So as you heard earlier in the program, it's a trade paperback. It's a great value. Get this book for yourself, for your friends, and get it signed tonight. And with that, our last question.
I would like another story. I remember hearing a story that you told about driving Don Vogel home after Don had been out on the town a wee bit.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear that one again.
Don was blind, and he worked at the KSTP for us. The motto used to be, let a blind man drive you home on parade, and he was hilarious, best impersonator. And we had a bet on a Bears-Vikings game. He's a big Bears fan, Chicago guy. and the loser had to buy the other guy dinner at Murray's. So Don didn't get out much, get away from the wife, who was very concerned about him. But that night, I picked up Don. I didn't pick him up. His driver dropped him off at Murray's, and I met him there. And he orders steak and martinis, and then a martini, and then a martini, and then a martini. And he's eating steak with his hands, and he's getting it all over himself, and it's just a mess. So then I'm going to drive him home afterwards. He doesn't know where he lives. He lives somewhere on Highland Parkway. But I said, what's your house look like? I don't know. And he said, So I'm finally keep driving up. I have roughly where the address is. And I finally see this woman like peering out. So I go up and knock on the door and said, do you want a drunk Don Vogel to be dropped off here? And she said, yes. And I said, so, okay. God, he was a funny guy. This is kind of tasteless and sexist and everything, but Don, we once got, somebody sent us a hat, like a baseball hat, but there were two breasts on it, right? And we told Don it was a Cubs hat, and we sent him out into the public with this hat on it. This is 25 years ago when we were all much less socially aware than we are. Anyway, he was a great guy, man. He was a hell of a guy.
I would spend 3 more hours here with you gentlemen, and I bet I wouldn't be alone. But we are at the end of our hour. I want to thank Christy and Rob and the Friends of the Hennepin County Library for the privilege of letting Star Tribune be a sponsor of this event all season long, and for being on the stage tonight. Part of my job at the Star Tribune is to attract more readers and subscribers to the Star Tribune. And this is how we do it, with great storytellers telling stories about Minnesota, in this case about Minnesota sports, that you won't find anywhere else. So if you're a subscriber to and a supporter of the Star Tribune, we thank you very much for that. And thank you for coming out, gentlemen, most of all. Appreciate your time on stage tonight and telling these stories. I was a little afraid we'd be rerunning our last event. This all felt new, and I hope we do it again, and I get to hear all new stories again. Thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for making my job so easy with your stories.
Appreciate it. Thanks to the crowd for questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So